You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Hello, business developers, and welcome to another episode of Breaking BizDev. I'm John, and I'm joined, as always, by my trusty co-host, Mark Wainwright. Mark, how you doing today?
I am well, John. How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
And today you were curious and I was curious about what business development, marketing, selling in professional services firms looks like across small firms, even as small as kind of solo practitioners, all the way up to mid-size and larger firms. And there's this sort of growth that happens over time. So from an audience and kind of listener perspective, it's, where are you now? Where do you see you and your organization, maybe if there's an organization, headed? And, when we look at the different organizations, consulting firms, architecture firms, engineering firms at different sizes, different development stages, what does this business development thing look like? As an added bonus, we have some guest voices coming to join us today because, as we just said, we're very curious about this. I am, as you are, a solo practitioner in the world of professional services, and I work with small firms, larger firms, mostly mid-size firms, but across the spectrum, and I see them at different levels of maturity. I have walked alongside small firms and larger firms as they have kind of grown and matured. And some of the voices that we've brought on our podcast today have done so as well. They have seen and worked with firms of different sizes, from the solos all the way up to the larger firms. So they have a good perspective to share.
Totally. So, Mark, I want to anchor our conversation with a couple of stats.
I love it.
So according to a 24 census, 60% of businesses in the United States are one-person businesses. Does that come to surprise you at all?
It would have at one point, when back in the day all I did was work in larger organizations. But now as a solo practitioner, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah, and then let's layer on another stat on top of that. So of the businesses with employees, so that remaining 40%, 50% of those have only 1 to 4 full-time employees. So if we're thinking about this, 80% of businesses have fewer than 5 employees.
Yeah. And again, no surprise walking alongside organizations, seeing how much of a challenge it is to grow and to mature. And no surprise there. So a vast number of professional services out there. Maybe this aligns with our audience. Maybe it doesn't. My sense is that a lot of people in our audience work with, mid to larger size organizations. Maybe there's some solo practitioners out there. But huge number of individuals working in very small or solo firms. And I think that underscores just the challenge of growth.
Yeah. So how can you break these barriers and grow beyond that 80% of the market? And so I think for this podcast episode, and I think this is a great visual, what I love is, like, if you were to close your eyes and if you were to hit fast forward on your business's growth and you were able to watch it like a fly on the wall, what would that time-lapse video look like of your sales and marketing operation within your business? And that's what this episode is going to focus on. What does that time-lapse video look like? Mark, I think you said something the other day that I thought was really interesting, and you shared this report. You said process is the driver of maturation. And I thought that was really interesting. And you shared this SPI, this Service Performance Insight report, and it's spiresearch.com. We'll have a link in the show notes if you want to download it. And I hadn't really thought about this before, but it brought an interesting perspective of, regardless of your size of an organization, your business development operation its maturity is based on structure of processes. Whether you're a solo consultant or whether you're an enterprise level firm who has 10,000 employees, the level to which or the degree to which your business development operation is systematized and structured will determine the success in terms of the key metrics. And we'll dig into some of those down the line.
Yeah. And I know we get a lot of eye rolls. I get a lot of eye rolls when I beat the drum of process and process improvement. I have very close, actually personal friends, some professional friends who, are in the world of process improvement. And it seems like a boring thing to kind of come in and talk about because, process improvement is not always the thing that's above the fold on the headlines, right? But as we will hear from some of the guest voices and through some of the information we've received from SPI, which I think is a fantastic report that they do annually, that yes, in fact, the critical factor of growth is maturation of organizational processes around all different types of functional areas. And obviously, we're most interested in this whole new business thing.
It's worth just touching on a couple key stats from this report, and then we can move on to our guest voices and taking a look at that time-lapse video.
Great.
And so as we're talking through some of these stats, SPI has organized the research sample into these 5 different levels. And so they look at the market in terms of level 1. These are initiated firms. They have ad hoc processes. That represents about 30% of the market. And so that you can think about like the hunter-gatherers, cavemen, if you will, on our maturity model. And so that goes up to the level 2. This is functional excellence. This is where processes start to become repeatable. You may have documented some down and you're trying to train someone else on how to do some. This is very rudimentary. And then that represents 25%. And so level 3, another 25%. This is project excellence. Standard set of operating processes have been deployed across your firm. And then level 4 is institutionalized. That represents 15%. They've got aligned metrics. They've got controls for all of these metrics across the firm, across their operations. And then finally, level 5, which represents only 5% of the market, according to this SPI report. They call these collaborative excellence. This is where firms focus on continuous improvement. So whether you're a solo operator, whether you've got a handful of employees, or whether you're a mid-sized operation, I think just taking a look at this, and again, the links in the show notes, kind of maybe see where you stand in terms of one of these levels, and then you can benchmark yourself in terms of some of the KPIs.
I came across this report a long time ago. SPI has been doing this for a number of years. I think it's very good. And actually, the funny thing is that these 5 levels of maturity are drawn from the Department of Defense. And this is something that I talked about on one of my podcast appearances over maybe 5 years ago, or maybe more. And it's funny to reflect on all of that. But really what you said right there, my takeaway from that is, and this is all self-reported, my takeaway from what you just said right there, John, is that you had 5 buckets there that stepped their way up. A full 80% of the firms have self-reported that they are only halfway through this 5-step maturation process. And these are firms that have likely been around for a while, small firms, large firms, whatever else. A full 80% of them have said that, yeah, we're only halfway. We've only started really creating some processes. That we have some new ones, but we have some that are kind of set that we've got out in the organization, and they are being embraced and executed at varying levels. So 80% of the firms out there are doing okay, right? Which says to me, wow, there's only 20% of the firms out there who are actually putting themselves in sort of the upper echelon of process stuff. And if, like we said, growth is driven by good processes, then a lot of these firms have, as you mentioned earlier, some barriers in place that they need to break through.
Yep, 100%. And we won't get into the details of the report, but there are some KPIs that break it down by all these different levels. You can look at percentage of bids won, percentage of referenceable clients, which I think is an interesting metric, year-over-year change in revenue, annual revenue per billable consultant, annual revenue per employee, which are two key growth metrics, profit in terms of EBITDA. So there's some really great metrics that you can use in this report. All right, Mark, let's get to this whole like time-lapse video scenario here. So I've organized these stages into 4 different stages in terms of like size of the firm. We talked about the levels of maturity. Here are the 4 different stages in terms of size. And I did this by a number of full-time employees.
Yeah.
So stage 1 is these solo freelancers, solopreneurs, solo consultants. It's just one person. Maybe you've got some 1099s that you're working with. Maybe not. Maybe it's just you. The second one is a small firm, and I categorize this as 2 to 49 full-time employees. I know that small firms can probably have more than that. And then mid-size, I categorize them as 50 to 500. And then enterprise 500 plus. You could make an argument for kind of for and against some of that. But just for the sake of this podcast, that's how I grouped them. But would love to hear if you have any arguments the other way.
It is my hope that regardless of the type of firm, regardless of the size of organization that you are in, I'm speaking to our audience here, is that, hopefully you are either creating opportunities for yourself in this whole new business world to help kind of lead and create all of this. So yeah, we're talking to solos, we're talking to people in large firms, all that stuff. So yeah, everywhere in between.
All right, so let's talk about this like transition from like a solo consultant into a small firm. So you've got a handful of employees, fewer than 50, but more than just yourself. So we talked about the importance of processes and systems. I don't think we need to belabor that. I think at this level, I think it's worth pointing out that documenting those processes is how you can start to train and share knowledge across new employees efficiently. I've seen it firsthand where there is not good documentation and there's like this shadowing effect that goes on. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And it takes 6, 9, 12 months for an employee to get fully up to speed.
Boy, just taking a second to think about what it would look like for me to grow beyond myself right now. Yeah, that would take a ton of time, a ton of my work, and then a lot of time for someone to come in and do that. So yeah, it's a huge deal making that jump.
Yeah. And then of course, like you need to understand your profit equation, right? You need to understand how you make money and then how the business makes money. One of my clients has a podcast and he's a financial analyst, and he talks about how banks really like to see an owner having a W-2 income and then having quarterly disbursements.
Yeah.
As two separate kinds of revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. I do not.
Well,
right. Most solos don't, but yeah, from a bank business financial standpoint, it makes a ton of sense because the easiest thing we can do is just underpay or, don't pay ourselves, and we just, hopefully there's a couple pennies left sitting on the desk at the end of the month.
Right.
Yeah.
But if your goal is to grow beyond just being a solo consultant and growing a business, that you need to understand that profit equation, those unit economics.
Yeah. Because then it moves from just paying one W-2 to paying 2 W-2s, which is not as huge of a mindset as like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what this whole W-2 thing world is all about.
Yeah.
What am I doing here? So yeah. Okay.
So then it kind of leads me to like that next question. And we've talked about this in the past and we've touched on it a little bit, but the 1099 versus W-2, when does it make sense to hire a full-time employee? So I think I would love to spend just a minute or two just kind of like talking through that. And I would love to get your sense on what are the markers that you would look for to where you would hire a W-2?
I've often said the whole sort of friends don't let friends W-2. So,
right.
I'm not a good person to talk to about this, but, and this is the challenge, right? Is that small organizations, solos, I mean, we're still talking kind of, we can even talk small firms here, but sort of the mindset is that there's just a bunch of people wearing a bunch of hats, or as we have said in the past, a bunch of heads, so you got a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And from a 1099 standpoint, I could have a handful of individuals doing 1099, freelance consulting work, whatever it is, fractional work for me. And then the switch would happen where I would say, all right, now I need to take all these 1099s and combine them into one person or maybe two people and turn that into a W-2, which sounds great on paper, but is really, really hard to do, because all of a sudden what you do is you take three or four different, helping hands, 1099s, and combine them into one W-2 that you bring in, and
It's riskier.
You want them to do 25% admin, 50% work with clients, 25%, go win new business, marketing work, whatever it is. So that's the challenge. And that's probably what happens to a lot of these organizations is solos. They've got some people helping them out here and there. They decide that they need to hire a W-2, and then they take all these different things and dump them into this one W-2 and
kitchen sink them.
Yeah. And then they hope that's going to work. I think there's a better path. I think and this ties a little bit into what Reuben says. I think at least that's what I teased out is from what Reuben says, about how you grow and the offerings that you put out there in the marketplace. And, and it ties in because I think that what he outlines is, as a solo consultant, you can get some big clients.
Yeah.
You can get some big clients with some big dollars, and then it's a really easy step. Yeah. If you got a big, $500,000, $1 million contract sitting in front of you, it's really easy to grow. So he touches on that a little bit.
That's true. Well, you teed him up, Mark. So let's throw to Reuben. Here comes Reuben Swartz.
There are lots of ways to grow a firm that don't necessarily involve adding more people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are a solo person, you're thinking, gosh, I don't want to manage a sales team. I don't want to manage people, maybe, period. Well, you can still grow. You can grow your impact. You can grow your income. You can grow your intellectual engagement in other ways without having to necessarily take on more people. Now, there's some things that you can only do with a team, obviously, but I don't think it's a requirement that growth means, okay, great, I've got to go get Salesforce and an actual Salesforce and manage all these people and blah, 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 blah.
What can you give some examples of what that looks like for solo consultants? How can they maybe an example of an offering that a solo consultant could, or like a specific kind of service, or maybe a product or something that a solo consultant could offer that is kind of taking their business to higher margin revenue because they're keeping their headcount low?
Sure. So I think you hit on it right there. One is you can package up your expertise in ways that don't require your time as much. So online courses, books, etc. And then the other thing is getting even tighter with that ideal client profile, so that instead of doing $50,000 projects, you're basically applying similar skills, maybe at a higher, more challenging level, but now they're $250,000 projects, or they're $1 million projects, right? There's often we are limiting ourselves because we think, gosh, that's a lot of money. No one's going to pay that. But if you get very focused on your niche and go help the people who most desperately need your help, there's a lot of room to grow that revenue and impact. And of course, that kind of ties in. These things can go together, right? If you spend less time doing the actual client work, but it's much more valuable if you broke it down to a per hour basis, well, then you can have somebody who helps you produce your online course or writes your book or whatever to free you up from some of those obligations. And where I see a lot of people get caught up with this is they blend together the clients that are most meaningful to them, which are often the ones that pay them the most money, that have sort of the most demanding work and all that, and the ones that pay them the least money. They might even be nonprofits, like where they're basically working pro bono, and they end up averaging them in their head and they get stuck in the middle. And one thing I say is, hey, go serve those super high-end corporate clients, make the money, do the work. They're only going to pay what they value. So go make the money and then do the other stuff pro bono. Like, don't even charge, like just go do it because it feels good. But those are separate things that happen to use your same expertise.
Reuben's audience are solos. I'm sure some of the folks out there who listen to our podcast are solos as well. He definitely has a bias, and in what he said right there, he's like, we just limit ourselves. Solos, small firms will just limit themselves as far as the type of clients they bring on, the type of contracts that they sign themselves up for. And I think there's a huge upside. There's a huge potential for solos to land big contracts. And the point I was making earlier was that when in fact you do land that contract, you can deliver it yourself, but if it goes beyond what you can do, there's a clear opportunity to have 1099s come alongside you and help you out with the work, or W-2s. So, even though he has a bias for those solos, I could clearly see in what he said right there, I could say, oh, what he just said is there's an easy way to move from the solo to a small firm from a finding and winning new business standpoint. And that to me was, we limit ourselves. We think too small. We don't pursue big fish, and nobody out there from a new business standpoint should be looking at their firm saying, we can't grow, I'm a solo, I can't grow beyond a certain point. He has the trick is that he mentions is that you need to find ways to do more with less.
That's
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And if that means if you stay small as a solo, great, but that's a clear entree into growing your organization, either with 1099s or W-2s. But that was my big takeaway from him, is that, the limits we put on ourselves, are these artificial barriers, and that it's totally possible to go out there and find, big contracts.
Yep. Sell first and then figure out how to deliver later. A little bit.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a chuckle with that, because right. all of the all the firms out there, and even the sort of subject matter of this is process, right? If a small professional services firm lands a whale, right? Like I call them whales.
Me too.
If you land a whale, then all of a sudden all your process stuff goes out the window, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you've got great processes in place that you're able to chew through it. You're gonna be like, we're ready to go. It's highly unlikely that, a solo practitioner out there has a process in place to immediately chew through, $1 million contract. But you never know.
Well,
but
maybe it's not a whale, maybe it's a marlin, and then you slog through it, and then you go back and you're like, all right, we got to update the process here, and here if we want to take on the bigger fish.
Right. Good point. Good point.
So let's move on to that kind of evolution, or that maturation from that small organization to a mid-sized organization. So we've gone through, in a solo firm, it's very much a founder-led sale, right? Because you're a solo consultant, you've got to wear all those different hats or Lego heads.
Yep.
And so now we've grown to a small firm where we've got a handful of employees. Let's say we've got 20 employees, and one of them is dedicated to business development, or maybe we've got, the equivalent of one, but it's spread out over some seller-doers. So those are the two most common different types of marketing and BD configurations. So there's more structure. There's a need for more systems in place, like we talked about. There's also this need for talent management, right? And then creating career paths. And we've talked about this before, that include marketing and sales responsibilities. It's not just kitchen sink, but there is setting an expectation that folks will contribute to business development.
Yeah. That SPI report lays out those 5 different maturity levels. It cuts across all different size firms. It cuts across all different types of firms, and it highlights the importance of all these different functional areas happening at all different levels of maturity with all different types of size of firms, and kind of what Mel talks about a little bit here, and what we're talking about in this sort of going from a small size firm to a medium sized firm stands true, meaning that you have to continue to grow in all these functional areas across all of your employees, small firm to mid-sized firm. You can't just continue to have the one partner, principal, whoever else it is, being the sole rainmaker. You need to distribute these responsibilities. You need to have good organizational practices that back all this up.
Yeah, let's throw to Mel, since we're talking about that talent management piece, because I think that's important, and he touches on that. Yeah. So here comes Mel Lester.
Most firms, they start out with this sort of entrepreneurial culture, where there's the focus on clients and doing the work, and then as they grow larger, and the business becomes more complex, or the business of operating a company becomes more complex. You have to get more structured, and you have to have more systems in place and that sort of thing. And that can be a tough transition to make. And in many cases, the principals who were very involved in doing the work, as they grow, then they have to take more of a leadership role and do less of the work and let other people step into those roles. And one of the key things there is that as you have visions of growth, is that you have to increase the bandwidth of your business development activities. And so, in other words, you can no longer rely on those few principals, perhaps, that with a small firm could do the bulk of the selling. And now you have to develop others to step into that role. And so that's part of it. Now, it's interesting as you look at these kind of growth dynamics. There's two critical functions that I have observed that are necessary for success in our business, and that is the ability to attract clients, and then the ability to attract talent, the people to perform the work for those clients. And obviously, it's critically important to retain both of those. You retain as many clients that you want to work with as you can, and as many of the employees that you want to hold on to as you can. One of the things I find fascinating is that for both of those critical functions, typically they're handled by only a very small subset of the firm. Most of the selling in most firms is done by a small number of people.
Right.
Most of the recruiting is done by a small. In many cases, we leave it up to HR to at least, drive the train, and then we'll do the interviews and make the selections. But we don't have many of our people actively involved in out there, recruiting people for our company and targeting the people that we'd like to work for our company. And so one of the things I have been interested in for some time is broadening the participation in both of those functions. We've seen that to a large degree on the recruiting side, where more companies now are doing referral recruiting, where some companies offer a referral bonus. That's not as effective as getting people actively involved, where everybody's out there taking advantage of the people they know and actively recruiting for their firm. So you create a culture in which what you want to do is shift from the culture where you've got basically a firm made up of consumers who depend upon the rainmakers and the recruiters to meet their needs, rather than having a role in making that happen. And to me, to create that greater bandwidth for growth, both in rainmaking and recruiting, you want to have broader participation in both of those critical functions.
All right, Mark, I liked how Mel referred to that, like, as a culture, going from a culture of consumers, so folks within the organization who are reliant on the rainmakers to bring in revenue, to a culture of creators where everybody, the team, is actively involved in both recruiting and sales. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of paradigm shift that Mel laid out.
I'm so synced up with Mel on that. You know it. That just totally sings to me in that these really critical, functional areas, not the least of which is this whole big business development thing, needs to, be borne by many across an organization, not just a few. One rainmaker in your organization creates sort of a precarious, situation, and we want to avoid that. We want many hands involved in it, and that's what that's what this podcast is all about, right? It's like that's what we want. And from a talent perspective as well, he draws very close parallels between sort of sales, marketing, new business stuff, and talent.
Yeah,
which I think is totally appropriate. I don't bump into talent a ton, but I do actually in an increasing fashion, because once I've worked with an organization for long enough, I start asking them questions about, hey, the new people, your either the young folks that are coming up or the new people that are coming into your organization, is everyone completely, aware and prepared for the culture you're trying to create here, which is, everybody carries the load, everybody finds and wins new work, everybody participates, lots of oars in the water.
So talent management is critical as you start to grow, and you need to train people that are W-2s within your organization. There's probably 1099s that you'll need to train as well. And, speaking of that, in working with mid-sized firms, one of the big marketing challenges that I've experienced across industries is accounting and financial services, AEC, consulting, is this phenomenon that happens when firms reach a certain size. They articulate this: what happens when the referral well runs dry, right? So they've relied on referrals to grow their business and that's how they've grown to the point that they are. And sure, there's still probably some juice they can squeeze around refining their referral strategy and kind of leveraging their clients, leveraging their employees for referrals. But it's usually at this point in a firm's growth where they start to kind of explore other different lead generation or prospecting options.
Yeah, good point.
And this is where they bring in agencies, they bring in freelancers, consultants to help them achieve that and figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, and the point you made about the sort of culture of consumers reliant on rainmakers to a culture of creators, that has to happen as well. This isn't something that when the referral well runs dry, we need to create. We need to go create new business opportunities, and it needs to happen across the organization. And yeah, that's a critical step here. And there's that whole sort of, that entrepreneurial spirit that we want people to have. Founders of organizations have an entrepreneurial spirit. It's just kind of that's who they are, right? They started the business, whether it's one or just a handful of individuals. Ideally, they are building and sort of fostering that in others that join them.
Yeah. So how do you keep that entrepreneurial flame lit as you grow? And so and we've got another clip from Mel Lester that we'll play here shortly. And he kind of takes a look at this in terms of like, how can you help the client or better serve the client?
Yeah.
And I think that was like an interesting perspective. All right, here comes Mel.
Some companies require that all their project managers at least sell to their existing clients, and many of them struggle with that. And part of that is this sort of myopic view of I'm just doing the work that's under contract. And they don't take a broader view of how can I help our clients, be more successful. Taking a broader view of, helping them thrive. And one of the new terms that have come up that I love is transitioning from a B2B company, business to business, to a B4B company, business for business. In other words, shift from just having a transactional, exchange of you pay us, we'll give you some service or develop a solution for you, to where we are now focused on helping our clients be successful overall. And our work may be a small portion of that larger story in which the client is pursuing their own business outcomes, their own success goals. And we need to tap into that. And by doing so, we create greater value. Greater value means more meaningful work, which then is a pull to bring people into our company and hold on to them. So you can make your business development goals and your recruiting goals align so that it's creating opportunities to serve our clients better, to do more meaningful work, to have a greater impact, and thus be able to have better clients and better people to do the work for them.
All right. Again, and that was Mel Lester, and he's talking about having that mindset of serving and not selling. So great perspective from Mel.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. It's not top of mind, I think, for people who are less experienced, people who are just starting to do new business. This speaks to that deeper level of new business development. And we've talked about this in the past, and I don't want to, digress too far on this, but I know that a lot of people think they need to develop new business, need to find and win work with prospective clients who are actively buying, who, have the request for proposals out there, who,
Right.
They've defined they have a specific need and they're just looking for a consultant or, worst case, a vendor to help them with it. This speaks to creating an organizational culture where people are thinking constantly, how can I help my clients when maybe those clients aren't actively looking for help? How can I understand? How can I learn more about them? How can I understand them, and then introduce some ideas that will help them that maybe they didn't occur to them, that maybe they didn't think about. So, yeah, this is what Mel talks about. This is what we talk about all the time. Is moving to that the small to mid-size organization. How do we have a large number, relatively speaking, a large number of individuals inside the organization, kind of building and maintaining this entrepreneurial mindset where they are engaging with their current clients to figure out how they can be of service, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even with new prospective clients, how they can approach those interactions with this really strong sense of curiosity to understand them deeply. So, yeah, I'm totally with Mel on all of this.
I don't want to spend too much time on this last section, but I do want to touch on some of the challenges that arise as firms grow from that mid-size to larger. A lot of that, in my experience and looking at the professional services market, is driven by mergers and acquisitions. So there's, firms, bigger firms buying smaller firms, either to expand into a new geography or to expand their service capabilities. And oftentimes what happens is, there's brands that need to be rolled up. There's processes, there's that word, that need to be overlaid and aligned across teams. And so there's a lot of, like, efficiency is a big word that comes up when these mid-sized firms are trying to grow. And it becomes, where are the economies of scale? How do we create efficiencies within our business development function? How can we create efficiencies in generating leads at scale to hit ever-growing growth targets, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, those are some of the big questions that arise as those firms start to grow.
And the point, to go back to that SPI research report, that they have those 5 levels of maturity. Even these very large firms, mid-sized firms moving to these enterprise size firms, there are many of them that are kind of wallowing, that they haven't reached the highest levels of maturity and performance. And it's because they wrestle with, you wrote some stuff down here about lead generation. Maybe they're still ignoring it. They're not doing a good job of it. Maybe they're taking their thready internal resources and just saying go, rather than really looking at it from a bigger perspective and what they should outsource, what expertise do they need to go get, not just in a W-2, but what consultants they need to work with in order to help them with all of that. So even large organizations don't have the expertise that they need in order to really move to that 5th level of maturity, where they have processes that they are constantly improving, whether it's, through what they do all internally, or whether it's using external folks as well. And you also have here about, leveraging technology. When firms get to be really big, they really have the opportunity to leverage technology, but some don't. I've worked with very large firms who have a very poor approach to organizational technology.
I want to go back to something that you said, Mark, and it just kind of like dots just kind of connected for me. And it was, you were referencing that SPI report, and that report's all about processes, systems, efficiency, and organization around that, not just in your business development function across all aspects of your business, but since this podcast episode is focused on marketing and sales, the larger you grow without progressing along that organizational maturity level, the harder it becomes to level up along that SPI index as you get larger.
You can see the and also from small firm to large firm, solo to small to, it's like I think there's a huge advantage, not just moving along those 5-step maturity levels, but also the small to large, because I think most large organizations completely lose touch with that entrepreneurial spirit. where it just doesn't exist anymore, which maybe a lot of, some of the firms I work with find themselves in competitive situations where they're the small guy, the David Goliath thing, small guy fighting against the large organization. And that's one of the things they tout, for better or for worse, right or wrong. They will say that they're small, agile, hungry, compared to a much larger organization. But that does happen, and reflecting on this conversation, I would say one of the biggest challenges with the large organizations from a new business standpoint, either with existing clients or with new clients, is that entrepreneurial spirit, is that drive. Because John, you and I know as solos, it's a big part of our world, and some lose track of it. Some, larger organizations can start to put that into silos, can shift it off to certain individuals who are focused on that. I get that. I'll always be the one that's waving the flag saying all of the experts inside of your organization need to participate in new business. But yeah, there's a few really important things as we move to this last really big organization, because there's probably a handful of people out there in the audience that are part of these really large organizations, and they're constantly, there's a question mark that says, what are we missing? Right? And that's one of the things. The entrepreneurial spirit, the drive to create new business, and all founded and based in really good processes, as is our subject matter today.
Excellent. Well, this has been really fun, Mark. I didn't know how this episode was going to turn out, because there's a lot of things in this outline that we put in here. But I think this was just a fascinating conversation, and maybe a topic that will, evolve our thinking on and revisit in the future.
No doubt. The process stuff is always that kind of boring, eye-rolly stuff. But I'll tell you what,
it's a key to growth.
It's key to growth, and it really kind of turbocharges your organization. It's like, okay, now we've got the process in place. Now what we need is just the people with the gumption and the entrepreneurial spirit to get out there and go do it.
Yeah, people and process.
Yeah,
right.
Good.
People and process. Well, Mark, this was great. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.